Hey everybody, my name's Cody King. This is my channel, Cody King's World. I'm going to show you how I started my breeder buckets. And yes, I started this in the loft of my house. As of right now, I have 9 buckets. 5 are African nightcrawlers and 4 are red wigglers. Now, if you want to do this the most self-sufficient way, you want to get a compost pile going. It is very easy to get a compost pile started, especially if you live in the woods. Go through the woods, gather up some leaves, make a big pile of them. Anytime you mow your grass, throw that into the pile. If you have animals like chickens or ducks, collect the bedding with all the poo on it and throw that into the compost pile. If you have a chipper, chip up some wood, throw that in the compost pile. If you don't have wood chips, talk to a landscaper. You might be able to get a whole truckload of them just dumped right there at your house. When I see weeds in my garden, I don't even get discouraged. I just know, hey, this is perfect. This is food for my worms. I gather it all up and I throw it into the pile, and after it breaks down 4, 6 to 8 months, you can then use that as the bedding for your worm buckets. The pile that I'm scooping up right now is 8 months old. I started this last fall. And as you can see, the chickens are right here looking for all these worms that are coming up out of the pile right now. So I know this is a perfect warm environment, perfect bedding for them. Now I'm going to bring these buckets down to my brand new sifter that I made, and I'm going to sift these through a 1/4 inch hardware cloth. Now, if you don't have a sifter, you can skip this part and use the compost as is. But if you want a more refined product, it's best to get yourself a sifter or to make one. I have a do-it-yourself video on my channel of how I built mine. You can follow along and build this for less than $200. Now, I have some very fine compost, and this will be the bedding for the worms. This is what they're going to live in. They will also eat this, and they'll return it and poo, and it's very, very small. So having this nice fine compost, you're going to get a lot more castings in the end. If you're using the coarse compost, you're going to have chunks of stuff that's going to get in the way of the castings when you go to sift it in the very end. After I had all the bedding ready, I gathered up some leaves and I shred them up. Leaves are great to toss in with the bedding, and also it's just great to have a bucket of leaves next to your worms. You never know when you might need to toss some in, and also since these leaves are already decomposing and have mold and fungus growing on them, this will be great to build a microbial life of your castings. So I'm going to bring a bucket of this up to my loft, and I'm going to show you what I got going on up there. So every bucket that I brought up here is filled halfway with compost except for 3. I have a bucket of leaves, and then I have a bucket of African nightcrawlers and a bucket of red wigglers. I'm going to go through and count up my worms. Now, most people wouldn't want to do this because it's really time consuming, and I understand that, but I think it's totally worth doing it at least once. If you're new to worm farming, you really don't know what 100 worms looks like or what 1,000 worms looks like. But by actually taking the time and counting them up, and you can also weigh them out, and you have a better understanding by doing it this way. So I was counting up African nightcrawlers, and I was putting 100 into the cup, and once I got 100, I would weigh them out, and sure enough, 100 African nightcrawlers comes out to about 100 grams. I thought that was pretty cool. If you're weighing it in ounces, it comes out to 3.5 ounces. Now, obviously it's going to be different if your worms are big or small, or if your bedding is wet or dry. But it's pretty cool to know about one African nightcrawler weighs about 1 gram. Now, I'm going to add leaves to the bedding in the breeder bucket. I added 2 handfuls to each bucket, and then I would blend it all together with my hands, really mix it up, and once I had it all mixed together, I would spray it down with the spray bottle. And I really sprayed a lot of water into the bucket. The compost wasn't really that wet, it was kind of dry, so I really just sprayed it enough to where I thought it was moist enough. You really don't want it to be dry, but you don't want it to be too wet. But by using the spray bottle, you have a little bit of a security blanket since you're not dumping a lot of water at once. You're just lightly spraying it, and once you think it's at a nice moist level, stop, and then it's time to add the worms. And this is 100 African nightcrawlers that I'm adding to the bucket. gave it one last spray down, and then I added a piece of plastic that I cut out from a trash bag. And I just took the bucket lid and I traced out the circle around the trash bag, and now this makes a nice cover for the worms to help keep it moist, and also it will help keep the worms in the bucket since the light can shine down into the bucket, unlike how a lid will be blocking the light. And I always have a light running for that reason, to keep the worms inside the bucket because they do not want to see the light. I wrote what breed of worm I had in each bucket, then I also wrote how many worms, and I wrote the date on it. Alright, I have all the worms in their buckets. The bin right here has over 400 worms in this one, of the red wigglers, and it has all of the cocoons. So that's kind of a little experiment here. See how that goes. But over here, each red wiggler bucket has 200 worms. I labeled all of them red 200 in today's date. And we have is it four? Yeah, 4 buckets. And then the African night crawlers, I have 3 buckets with 100 worms. I got 1 bucket of just the cocoons. We'll see if they hatch and see how many worms show up. And then this bucket here was just there's like 25 worms I counted. So altogether I had about 325 African night crawlers. And I had over 1,200 red wigglers. And I counted pretty much every single worm for the most part. But this is what the setup looks like now. I sliced up some cucumbers, and I also had 1 frozen banana, and I put all of these into the buckets and into the bins. I just simply placed them on top like this. Now, I didn't see my first couple of worms come up to the top to feed on these until about 3 days. So it seems like that first 3 to 4 days, they're mostly deep into the bucket, feeding on the leaves or other type of stuff that's in the bedding. But after about a week, you'll see a lot more activity on the very top layer of the buckets. So about every, let's say after a week, I would probably feed them again. And then about every 3 to 4 days, I would throw some more stuff in there. And it would really, like, if you put a banana in there, it would be gone within 3 to 4 days. And I would also blend up some food. I would use this food processor that I had with my Ninja, and I just threw anything that I have. I had some leftover green beans. I snapped a lot of beans, so I had a lot of just like ends and stuff that I didn't use. I would throw that all in there. Anything that I have surplus from the garden, I would throw that in there and just blend it all up. And then I would just make a little layer of food on top of the bucket, and they would come up the next day and they'll be all over it. So this is really just a great way of feeding your worms. Is just any type of kitchen scraps you have, just throw it on top. And if you have a surplus amount, you could freeze it and then use it in the future. And that's what I did here. Also, don't be alarmed by any mold. You're going to have some mold on the top layer. It's going to happen, and it's a great thing. This is what is building up that microbial life. This is what you want. After 4 weeks, you want to sift the buckets and collect all the worm castings, also collect the cocoons, and then collect the worms. And then just repeat this process. And by doing this every 4 weeks, you're getting those cocoons before they hatch. Because once they hatch, they're just little tiny baby worms. And when you go to sift it, you're probably going to lose a lot of them, or they're going to get lost in the process of it. They're kind of hard to see where they're at. And by having the bucket of cocoons, once you're finished with this process, you can just add the bucket of cocoons to a bigger bin or a bigger tote, and that can be your nursery. And then every 4 weeks, whenever you have that bucket of cocoons, just throw that into the big tote that you have, and those cocoons are going to hatch, and you're going to have thousands and thousands of worms. Now, after 4 months, those worms will then be able to produce, and you can start breeding those worms and gathering up their cocoons. And then once you get to that time, I mean, you're going to be loaded with worms. I mean, say if you started with 1,000 worms, and then you have every 4 weeks, that 1,000 worms will produce, I mean, probably 1,000 of cocoons, and then every cocoon can have 1 to 20 worm, but on average, it's about 4 worms to a cocoon. So then you have 4,000 baby worms each month, and then once you get to that 4th month, that 4,000 worms you have from the first month will now produce 4,000 cocoons. And then, I mean, you're set. You just have so many worms. I mean, you only know what to do with them. But so the best thing really is just to have a big nursery, and then you can sell these worms, or you can just start another worm bucket and just keep adding and keep building up your little worm farm that you started. And that's where I'm at right now. This will be the first time that I sift my buckets. I'm going to do it this weekend. I want to get this video out, though, to show you guys where I'm at in the process. And so once I sift these, the cocoons that I already sifted last month, those cocoons, or those babies, will be a month old now. So I'm just going to keep repeating this process, and then after another 3 months from now, I will then start breeding those first batch of cocoons that I have in the bucket. I really like this method because the buckets are cheap and they're easy to move around. If you saw the very beginning of the video of where I was moving the bucket up the spiral staircase up to my loft, it would be really hard to do that with a big, like, 15 or 18 gallon tote. I couldn't manage it. But by having just these buckets and they're only halfway filled, it works out great. And I'm also maximizing my castings. I mean, I'm sifting them every month, so I have some more that I can sell to people. And then I'm also just gathering up all the cocoons, and I have a bunch of baby worms. So I really like this method. It's cheap, it's easy, and it doesn't really take a whole lot of effort, really. Maybe 10 to 20 minutes a day that you'd be checking on the worms and feeding them, spraying them with the water. And then once a month, you got to sift them. I mean, I could take 4 hours out of my weekend to sift these worms and redo this process. It really doesn't take that long. So I hope this video taught you something. I hope you like it. And if you do, please subscribe to my channel, follow along, and I will have plenty more videos coming out. I already have a bunch out right now. You can check those out. If you have any questions, please just leave in the comment section. Thank you for watching. Have yourself a great day.